hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. All right, so this is a delightful crowd on
It's as loud as
a
it gets.
rainy, I can't say winter, I mean early summer. I saw a wonderful huge bear in my, just outside my door this morning, so they're out. How many of you have butterfly gardens? All right. And how many of you aspire to have butterfly gardens? That's why you're here. All right. So, you know, wouldn't it be lovely to see that in your yard? But, you know, we used to have more butterflies in our area because we used to have a lot of natural areas that provided meadows that had meadow plants in it that provided the nectar and habitat for these creatures. We don't have many of those anymore. If you look around most of our suburban yards, we have an awful lot of grass. And grass doesn't support a heck of a lot. There are some flowers here, you can see. That's, oh no! But you see, there are flowers there. That's what the poor butterflies would have to go after. So how we're maintaining our lawns is not particularly beneficial for these creatures. But if you want a butterfly garden, there's some very basic things that you need to have. Generally, it helps to have full sun. How many of you have full sun in your yards? Right? I mean, we live under trees in Simsbury. We need the flowers for the nectar source. We need the host plants for the caterpillars. And hopefully we aren't using things that are going to kill off the other insects and the insects that we want to attract to the yard. So no pesticides. But we have lovely butterflies in this area. But I have to take you all back to second grade, because sometimes we forget that in order to have the butterflies, you have to have some place for them to lay their eggs. You have to have something for them to eat as caterpillars. They have those little munching mouths. They only eat leaves. Then they have to have a place for them to cocoon or form a chrysalis before they become those things that we want in our yard, the butterfly. And I have to say this because one day at the Nature Center, I had a lovely mother and her little darling little 2-year-old, 3-year-old child come, and they had a butterfly in a bug box. And the bug box was stuffed with grass. And this, the mother was very concerned that the butterfly had not eaten any of the grass in the bug box. And I took this poor thing. The poor thing had beaten its wings against the cage. It had very few wings left. But I took it out to a flower, and the poor thing, immediately its mouth part was onto the phlox, trying to get something to eat. So I always think it's good to go over this basic thing if you're going to have a butterfly garden. So let me take you through that. This is the egg. Sometimes they're laid singly, sometimes they're laid in multiples. Here is the monarch butterfly egg. These are morning butterfly eggs, aren't they gorgeous? And if you go on Google and you can look up all the different eggs for the different butterflies, they're all works of art. And here, there is the monarch caterpillar emerging from its egg. And do you all know what its first meal is going to be? The eggshell. Mom's packed a whole lunch there for the little one to get started on. And then, of course, if it's a monarch butterfly caterpillar, it's going to eat milkweed. And that's the only thing that it will eat. And Mom knows exactly where to lay that egg. How does she know? Does she identify the leaf? Does she smell it with her antenna? No, she tastes it with her feet. She lands on it and she says, yes, this is what I remember eating when I was young, and she lays her eggs there. And so a caterpillar, like all insects, have to go through what we call instars. And so it starts off as the egg, and as it eats it, you know, after it's hatched out the egg, that's that little tiny one up at the top. As it eats, it sheds its exoskeleton, and then has a bigger one underneath, and it grows through these stages. Sometimes there's 5, sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 6, depends on the insect. And here you can see it's stepping out of its old skin. So it's very important that it goes through those stages. And then the miracle happens. It will form its chrysalis if it's a butterfly, or it spin its cocoon if it's a moth. This is one of those things we just say, oh yes, it goes in there and then it becomes a butterfly. But what's really interesting, when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon or the chrysalis, it sort of turns to pudding and then completely rearranges its whole body so that it has, you know, instead of stubby little caterpillar legs, it's got long legs, it's got, you know, it changes its whole mouth part, the eyes change, it gets antenna, all of these different things. It's one of the most miraculous things. And I think if you came from another planet and you were told that caterpillar is going to turn into that butterfly, you'd say, no, I think they're fooling me. And so here are some of the other ones. Here's the Luna moth caterpillar, which is camouflaged with leaves spun together with silk. There's the tiger swallowtail cocoon. And of course the monarch butterfly is the most amazing one. It looks like it's a little bit painted with little gold beads. And here it is. You can see that it's ready to pop open. It's just absolutely ready. And out it comes. And when it comes out, it's all crumpled up like clothes in a padded packed suitcase. And then it has to pump liquid through its wings and dry off. And if there's something goes wrong along that stage, and one wing ends up crumpled, it won't be able to fly, it won't be able to go off and find food, it won't be able to go off and find a mate. And then most definitely it won't be able to lay an egg. So all these things have to go just right, and you have to have that food for that caterpillar. So you can plant your garden in full sun. That's an ideal way of getting your flowers. And why you want it in full sun is because of that other miraculous process that goes on, photosynthesis. Again, plants are able to go out, and still all of you who had to cook dinner tonight, imagine how lovely it would be on, before the sun set if you just went out and had a drink of water, put your arms up in the air, your face towards the sun, took in a deep breath of carbon dioxide, and dinner would be made. That's essentially what plants are doing. But if they're in the sunlight, they have more energy to make more food. So that's the basic. And then the thing is, you want for a butterfly garden, you want to attract flowers that they can see and that they will want. Now, butterflies tend to be promiscuous eaters. They will eat any nectar. You can put out sugar water and they will find that just wonderful. But better yet, to put them in this form of flowers. The flowers will give the nectar with a little extra added oomph of nutrients that it needs. So there are certain colors that the butterflies are attracted to, and these are some of them. And if you want to have butterflies in your butterfly garden, you want to have flowers throughout the season. So starting in April, one of the earliest butterfly flowers is violets. How many of you have violets in your gardens? Yes. And how many of you have tried to get rid of the violets in your garden? Oh, what a shame. But yes, those are very important. And you can see that nature has planned that there are flowers throughout the season to feed the various butterflies. There are butterflies that come out at different seasons of the year, different weeks and different months of the year. So you need to have nectar for them at that time if you really want to have a butterfly garden. And there's some lovely plants, native plants, or this is creeping phlox. It makes a beautiful show. And one of the things you want to do is put them into large stands. Here's one that's a favorite. It's got the little individual tubular flowers, so the long proboscis of the butterfly can go into those little stems. And these are the Monarda fistulosa is the lavender one, and the Monarda didyma. We're sort of in between the ranges for both of those, so both of those are lovely native plants in our garden. The Monarda fistulosa is more northern, and didyma is more southern. This is not really a native, but it's a neighbor. It's more from the prairies in the Midwest, but certainly one that the butterflies enjoy in the garden, the coneflowers. And then this spectacular plant, Joe Pye weed. Now there's always a problem when a native plant gets called a weed. It's not a weed. It's a spectacular plant, and there are some new varieties that are shorter if you don't have room, but put this in the back of your garden. This one blooms later in the year towards September, and it is a butterfly magnet. And goldenrod. How many of you have goldenrod in your garden? Excellent. This is an important plant for this area. This is one of my favorites. It's a showy goldenrod. It is a spectacular garden plant, and the butterflies, the late season butterflies, absolutely adore it. This is not one, as we said, I think in the last session, you will not get allergies from this plant. It's got big sticky pollen that only the bees can move around. It will not get into the air and then into your eyes, like the ragweed that blooms at the same time, but you don't notice. This is another important one. These are just a few of the highlight plants that you can put in your garden. Asters. There are so many different kinds of asters. There are asters for almost every location. There are wood asters that you can put if you do have a forested yard, and they will bloom in September. And even if you have a somewhat shady garden, you can put in some of the plants, they will still flower, the butterflies will still be attracted to it. So, and the cardinal flower if you have a wet yard. So there's really no condition where you can't have some flower that will attract some butterfly. But speaking of that cardinal flower, often we are tempted to have flowers that look ever so much better to us than the native variety, the native species. And here you can see there is a cultivar here, which is the one that you might be able to buy in the nurseries because it's got so many more red flowers. It was bred to appeal to us. But what the scientists are finding out is in some cases, when it's appealing to us, it doesn't necessarily, it's not as attractive to some of the pollinators. For instance, the native one has to decide how much energy from the sun am I going to put into my leaves, how many I'm going to put into my flowers, how much am I going to put into the nectar, the pollen, all these different things, how much am I going to put into that. When we crossbreed some of these things and make them into cultivars, we go after the flowers. There might not be as much energy left for that plant to put it into the nectar. The nectar might not be as nutritious. There might be things that are missing from that design. It depends on which animal is nectaring off it, but it's better to go with the native variety. That's the one that the native insects are used to. Also, when we do some alteration of the flowers, we don't necessarily look at the flowers the same way the animals do. Here is a flower that looks lovely to us, a lovely yellow flower. This is taken into the daylight conditions with the colors that we can see. But under ultraviolet light, which the butterflies can see, it would look like this. So a bee will also see it that way. The flower is communicating with the pollinator, saying, this is where I want you to go. Go right to the middle. The white part's the landing pad, and the others are sort of like the lines on the airport or the highway, telling you where to go, and that's where you want to go. And after the pollination is done, those tend to disappear, or the petals fall off and saying, the restaurant is closed. And then the whole thing that we make our flowers so complicated for some of these creatures. Here is a petunia, and you can see it says, this is where you go to the middle. That other one that looks like crumpled tissue paper is a hot mess. Where do you go? Will there be anything, even if it did manage to muscle through into the middle of it? Now, a lot of people think that one is far showier and beautiful in the garden, but who are you gardening for? So if you're wanting a pollinator garden, simple is better. That's the way nature has designed it. And you can see here, this butterfly is perfectly designed to pollinate this azalea. You can see the long the anthers that are coming up here and the stamens out here. So when that butterfly's body lands on it, the pollen is getting on the underside of the butterfly. This is not a plant that can be easily pollinated by a small bee. It's not designed to be pollinated by them. There's a definite correlation between the plant and the insect that pollinates it. Nature has been working out this association for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's delightful when you go into your garden in the spring and the summer. Look at the plant and think, how is this pollinated? Think about where will that pollen land? And it's quite fun to see. Some plants have to be sort of forcibly opened by bumblebees. Now, when we garden, plants are expensive. And you don't know what's really going to work in your garden or not. It's sort of trial and error. And there are just so many lovely plants out there that I know I'm always tempted to buy a couple. I know it's supposed to be 3 or 5 or 7. Those are good design numbers. But you go and buy a couple of plants, and then you plunk them in the garden. And I call this polka dot planting. This will work, but it's confusing to the butterflies. They've got lovely little insect eyes. They're looking for massive stands of things. So we do this, but the butterflies might really appreciate large banks of flowers. So this means that there might be some areas of the yard, after this is bloomed, they'll just have the seed heads, which will attract other things. But you might have to have areas where you have large attractive stands of these flowers. And there's always a thing, just because a butterfly likes it doesn't mean you should plant it. This is purple loosestrife. This is a beautiful garden plant. It didn't come from around here. This is a non-native plant. It came from Europe. And here you can see it in this wonderful English perennial bed. It looks so innocent until it gets out into the wild. And I remember several years ago, I was driving up in the Mohawk River Valley, and this was all you saw. And I was trying to explain to my son why this wasn't good. And his answer was, it looks gorgeous. And I said, no. Can you see what the problem might be here? There's lots of food for the butterflies. There is no food for the caterpillars. Caterpillars don't eat loosestrife. It's not from around here. They don't know what it is. So you'll have a wonderful set of butterflies, and the next year you will have no caterpillars. Therefore, the next year you won't have butterflies. So even though this looks spectacular and there's nectar galore, you have to have something else. And this goes the same thing with this plant that's sold as butterfly bush. Oh my goodness. Yes, the butterflies will come, they will drink the nectar, but that's not good enough to have a butterfly garden with only nectar. You have to have something that feeds not only the adults. You have to go back to that life cycle of the butterfly and see what is it going to eat when it's laying. What are the little ones? I love this. This is so the garden. Garden thing. I'm like, no, too much. So, and this is an invasive plant down in New Jersey. If we got a little bit warmer, it has every potential to spread up here. So this is what you want to see. You want to see holes in your leaves, not the whole leaf eaten by and large, but you want to see that there is something eating and living in your garden. You want to see that you have caterpillars. As a matter of fact, I don't think we should call them butterfly gardens. I think we should call them caterpillar gardens. Because if you have butterflies, you may not have caterpillars. But if you have caterpillars, you will have butterflies. So let's explain the importance of those caterpillars. You need the host plant, the ones that are going to feed the caterpillars. And since we're in the library, you're all familiar with this book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Well, he had it wrong. There are some caterpillars that will eat a wide variety of things, like this gray hair streaks. 50 different types of plants from 20 different plant families. It is a gourmand. It will eat anything. But most of the caterpillars are very picky eaters. This should have been his sequel. The very picky caterpillar. Because most caterpillars will only eat one or two of the things. And we have beautiful butterflies and beautiful caterpillars. Here we have, this one's not upside down. That's a morning folk butterfly. And that will be one of the first butterflies you'll see this spring. They come out before the flowers are out, and the males have to follow the yellow-bellied sapsuckers around. The sapsuckers will drill holes in the tree, the sap will rise. That will provide the sugar for this little guy, and that's the way he climbs down the trees. But all of these, and then spring azure, the one in the middle, that will be one of the earliest butterflies too. We have beautiful butterflies, and we have spectacular moths. Not as many as we used to. How many of you have seen the clear-winged sphinx moth down there? And said to yourself, that is the strangest looking hummingbird. They fly like a hummingbird, but they are a pollinator. This is a spectacular moth. However, you're not going to see it in your butterfly garden because sadly they only live for 5 days when they are a moth because they have no mouth. Oh, I know, very sad. They only live to mate. But they're beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things. But the caterpillars are really important. So, as I said, some of the caterpillars only eat one thing. We all know that the monarchs need to eat the milkweed. Well, why is that? Well, that's because they get their defensive chemicals from the milkweed. Plants are little chemical factories. And when they're standing up in the sun making sugar, they're making a whole lot of other things. The scientists have come up with, I think, about 30,000 different chemicals that plants make. Not one plant, but all of them together. And in the case of milkweed, they're trying to protect themselves from the herbivores, from creatures that will be eating it. So if you've ever broken off a leaf of milkweed, you see that lovely sticky sap, then try to put it on your fingers. And one of the things I like to do is you put it on your fingers and you blow on it. And then eventually your hands will stick together. And you know, it's hard to get them apart. It's a defense mechanism where the insect that eats that plant is going to eat it, and then its mouth is going to get stuck together, like a very, very bad peanut butter sandwich. And that'll stop the insect from eating that plant. But the chemicals in it are used for the protection of the insects. So that is why the monarch butterfly caterpillar can wander around in this black and yellow and white clown suit. And it's essentially screaming to all the creatures, don't even think about eating me because I taste terrible. And the same thing with the milkweed beetles. They're advertising their poisonousness by showing up in a bright advertising color. And that is why the monarch butterfly flaps around in orange wings, because orange in nature says, don't eat me, I don't taste good. So it is protected by that plant. And if the mother butterfly laid her eggs on anything else, the caterpillar would not survive. It needs that. And here is what happens if a young, inexperienced blue jay happens to eat one of the monarch butterfly caterpillars. It gets not feeling very well, and says, I don't like the orange ones, they don't taste good. So he will learn from that. And we used to think that the viceroy butterfly was just mimicking the monarch butterfly. It's easier if you look like something that also tastes bad. The animals tend to leave you alone. But we've subsequently learned that they are eating willows. And willow, for any of you who have ever had an aspirin dissolve on your tongue, the salix plant is where aspirins are derived from. The salic acid used to come from willow trees. It's not a pleasant taste. So those viceroy caterpillars and the red-spotted purples are protecting themselves with that nasty tasting chemical from the willows. Willows are a really important host plant for these species. And there's that salic acid. And also, this lovely little caterpillar, what does it look like? In the early stage, before it's eaten a lot of willow, what does it look like? Yes. Birdwood. Yes. Yes. And a lot of caterpillars will use that defense before they've eaten a lot of their host plant, if it has the chemicals in it to protect them. Then it's great. So those of you who say you have violets in your yard, excellent. You have, and you've got them in your grass, all the better. You have a horizontal butterfly garden. And this is one of our most common butterflies, the great spangled fritillary. I love its name. And there is its very peculiar little caterpillar up in the top, not particularly attractive one, but the only thing they will eat are violet leaves. So if you have violet leaves, you have a butterfly garden. Without even trying. Wonderful. And then here we have spice bush. How many of you have spice bush in your yard? Excellent. It's a very common plant here, and the deer don't particularly like it. It makes a benzoin chemical. And then if you break that leaf, it's got this lovely lemony, soapy smell. We like, but the insects can't stand, except for the spice bush caterpillar. That's the only thing it will eat. And anytime you see the name of the butterfly, the name of the plant, in with the name of the butterfly, you know that there's a connection there. That's what they need to eat. And here they're wonderful. These are the caterpillars of the spice bush swallowtail. This is one of my favorites. Early in its first instar, before it sheds its skin, it definitely tries to look like bird droppings. And then as it sheds and as it gets more of that chemical in itself, it's warning off the other creatures, and it starts to look like a snake. So here you have, these are not its eyes are down there. These are fake eye spots. And so if you're a bird and you're coming up and you see that looking at you, you're going to leave, because that is just too scary for the bird. But if you're a mouse and you come by, mice have that wonderful sense of smell that birds don't have. But the one in the far bottom corner, they will stick out these two fleshy horns that absolutely reek of spice bush. And that will drive away any of the little mammals that might want to come and eat it.